This isn't just a podcast, it's a movement. The Middle Ground Mike is fighting for truth and unity. Subscribe now or support us today. Links are in the notes. Stand with us.
America spends more on healthcare than any nation on earth, yet we're sicker than ever. From lead exposure to food deception, tonight we confront what's really making us sick. And this is the Middle Ground Mike.
Good evening, everybody. We got a great guest today. You guys have heard some of the episodes that I've done on Campbell's Soup, Lunchables. I got one coming out pretty soon on protein drinks. We've got a very, very, very great guest here. Doctor, introduce yourself to everybody. I'm terrible with names, so I would introduce yourself to everybody what you're about.
I'm Dr. Nelva Lee, and I am just a mother that wanted to make sure that my child who's on the spectrum was as healthy as possible. So, and just an overall health nut.
That's never a bad thing.
Yes.
We talked about, we both have children that, have that condition. I'm always unsure of how to label it.
On the spectrum.
Yeah, on the spectrum. You did hear my episode about lead contamination. And the one thing for me, that really stood out when I was learning about it is lead accumulates. It doesn't just pass through, which was even crazier that the more I learned about how much lead is in things. And then I forget which physician group it is, but they have they say that there's no acceptable limit, but the government actually has a daily acceptable limit.
Mm.
For you, what would you, when you heard about that kind of stuff, what would you say that's this is the problem with something like this?
Well, I could tell you that I've always been dumbfounded by the American government not taking steps to protect its citizens the way that other developed nations have. It's always been something that has been concerning to me. When you go to other developed nations, half of them don't have most of the pesticides and hormones that are common in our foods that are banned in theirs. I'll tell you a story. We went to Mexico, and even when we went to Jamaica, my son loved drinking their Coca-Cola because it was made with sugarcane, not with cornstarch. Just little things like that, but it just accumulates. It becomes pervasive when you look at all the different foods that we are consuming that are making us sick. Carcinogens and things that, like you said, lead that does not pass through your body, that just has so many detrimental health effects. And all it takes is just simple banning it from our government, like all the other countries do. So yeah, it's something that if every citizen was aware, they can educate themselves and try to keep themselves from consuming these products. But I'm very much encouraged by Robert Kennedy now being in office and taking those steps towards the correct steps towards keeping the American citizens safe.
Yeah. And I tell folks all the time, I say, be critical of RFK if you want. It's natural to be critical of our leaders.
Yes.
But we should always expect our leaders to question everything they see, because what we knew 5 years ago is not going to be the same what we know 5 years from now.
Correct.
It's going to change. And things have become so polarized that now if you question anything, everybody always assumes there's an agenda behind it. And that is where children like ours kind of gets, because of their position, they're stuck. It's hard to know who's fighting for them, who's not, and really who's fighting for our health.
Exactly.
For you, when officials say, hey, this is below the limit, I love that below the limit thing. What do you hear that parents aren't supposed to hear?
I mean, frankly, I don't believe anything that they have to say. I've always been very critical that way. So that's just how I roll. But really and truly, my litmus test is it okay in other countries?
Yes.
If it isn't, then why are we even allowing it here? That is my main concern. Is it just all about the bottom line? Is that more important than our health? I mean, we can see just statistically how obesity rates have just skyrocketed since the 50s, right? We're not eating more. We're just eating more junk. We're consuming more pesticides, more hormones. And then on the flip side, our nutrients. The foods are less nutritionally dense than they used to be. So what is going to happen with that equation? It's going to lead to obesity. It's going to lead to diabetes, cardiac issues, which is what we're seeing, and of course, cancer.
Yes, and it's crazy to me that even when you show some folks the graphs of, across, I call it across the pond because that's what Europeans call it when they refer to us.
Right.
And I kind of use them because our societies are so similar with how we do live our lives, and
Hmm.
their cancer rates now, they have similar problems, right? Their rates have gone up with certain things, right? But their rates are just like a way slower pace. They're making more progress on it than we are, and they're faster to react. Like, why do systems that are meant to protect kids here, they seem to react after damage is done?
Way after and after lawsuits. And here's the problem. We are spending more in healthcare here, 2 or 3 times more, and we're getting much more detrimental effects. So
Yes.
our results, our healthcare metrics are akin to those in undeveloped nations, okay? Not a developed nation. But yet we're spending trillions of dollars, more than any other country in our healthcare. I call it sick care, what we have here in America.
Yeah, I actually I had an episode I had done back in December. I think I put it out called Sickness Synergy. When
Mm,
I had talked to you about the shareholders of those two industries before. So that
got it.
I kind of, it's like a synergy. It's the thing that feeds off each other. And to be fair, I don't think way back in the day things were trying to go in that direction. I think like money corrupts, right? And things kind of go that way. I don't think it started off. It just kind of headed in that direction. And then, you got people who give money to people they shouldn't. And then, we're at where we're at.
Mhm.
The public thinks that the government's policy is logical. And I mean, it does seem like it at face value if you haven't really looked into it, because I'm not going to lie. At one point, I was 600 pounds. I've lost close to 290 of it.
Good,
You
good
know,
job.
Thank you. So, I mean, but it was, like, I mean, I knew that I don't blame anybody. It was my fault, really. But
But
they,
it wasn't. It was partially your fault. But
right.
really and truly, it was definitely aided by our food industry, our pharmaceutical industry.
Well, what really got me is what they tell you. Hey, this alternative is healthy for you. So me being the clueless person I was at the time, I was like, yeah, I'm gonna try that. And then once I started looking at it, I'm going, man, this stuff has more sodium and more chemicals in it than the other item did. So when you kind of factor that in, it's actually even worse for you, especially with those artificial sweeteners. Those things are just a lot
They're
of them.
horrible. Yes, they're.
The only one I've seen that seems to be remotely okay is stevia,
Mhm.
but stevia does not disintegrate that well.
I would encourage anyone that wants to be healthy to just go on a plant based as much as you can. And again, even our plants are less nutritionally dense than they used to be, because of the soil and other factors. But as close as you can to have plant based and try to stay away from processed foods, even though quote unquote healthy processed foods. You have to just take everything with a grain of salt. You have to be very critical of all processed foods that pass through your mouth. And especially if you have children with ADHD or on the spectrum, even more so, because they are even very sensitive to any dietary products.
Yeah, and not we were talking before the show. I had adjusted some of what my son eats, and I seen a difference in him.
Yes.
I'm sure you've seen the same from your end.
Correct. And my son is now an adult, but at the time when we were really, when his behaviors were much more of an issue, we definitely reduced all dyes, or eliminated, not reduce. We just eliminated all dyes. We eliminated, MSG from his diet. We eliminated a lot of the, processed foods as much as we could. And, we saw a market difference. And I'm going to add to that is also screen time. We don't take that into account, but there is such a thing as screen induced ADHD. And I don't know if your audience is aware of that. So screen time plays a huge, neurological factors. They say that if you, and this is for everyone, if you wake up and within 7 minutes you are looking at your screen, which whether it's your laptop, tablet, or cell phone, within 7 minutes, affects your brain and your ability for dopamine for the rest of the day.
Wow. Now that I didn't
Yes,
know.
just yes. So leave your phone alone. Go get some water. If you're able to, get some exercise. Go outside and get some natural light and see how that affects your body. They say, breakfast is the most important meal of the day, right? You've heard that.
Oh, yeah.
But it's not so much breakfast, it's the fact that you're breaking your fast, right? Because you slept overnight and you didn't eat. And the very first things that you put into your body affect how your body is going to metabolize for the rest of the day. That's why it's the most important meal. It's not necessarily that you have to eat it, but everyone's going to break their fast at some point, and you need to break it with something that's going to help your metabolism, not hinder it. And so things like lemon or something citrus, really, it doesn't have to be lemon, but something citrus is going to help your metabolism for the
Oh,
rest
yeah.
of the day if that's the very first thing that you're ingesting when you're breaking your fast, uh, as opposed to something sweet like a hot chocolate or whatever you want to add to that. It's little things like this, and this is information that's available. Google it, chat gpt it, it's available, but we have to be advocates for our own health, definitely.
Yes. Yeah, no, and that makes really a whole lot of sense when you really kind of think about it. The only hard time I've had is when I shifted away is I learned to make my own.
Excuse me.
Oh, bless you. I learned to make my
Thank
own
you.
kielbasa
Okay.
from scratch, and I started kind of going into the German roots a little bit, started pulling out how they do a lot of things, and it's crazy about how healthy their version of everything is.
Oh
And
gosh,
something that I don't think the public really realizes, the bright red meat you see in the grocery store is actually terrible for you
it's a
because
dye.
meat's not supposed to look like that. Like when you butcher a cow, the meat is not bright red.
No, no, no. That's just dyes to make it look like it's healthy. Yeah.
Yeah, and so to me, it's like, and I'm sure they'll tell us there's nothing bad about it, but I don't know. Just with everything I've learned, I'm skeptical.
But dyes are also added to our fruits,
Yes,
to apples and strawberries and grapes, you name it. And so just really, really be mindful of the food that you're ingesting.
yeah, but when you kind of think about the system, right? Just like how it works in general, what's something that the system knows per se that, your observation, but it avoids saying out loud to everybody. It's kind of like one of those, it's in front of your face, but they just don't say it.
Well, when it comes to American food industry and pharmaceutical industry, it's all about the bottom line. What's going to help their bottom line, not necessarily the health of Americans. And that is why we need regulators. We need our government to protect us. And so I'm very, very happy that we finally have someone at the highest levels that seems to be doing just that. He is going against years and decades of the very powerful food lobbying and pharmaceutical lobbying. And so how much, actual changes he's able to implement, we'll see at the end of the day. But everybody here that's listening has the power of what they consume, right?
Yes.
You're voting with your wallet. You are voting with your wallet. You're letting that company know, you know what, you can continue to poison me and my family because I'm going to continue to purchase your products. I mentioned this. I don't know if it's okay, Joe, but I mentioned before our call an app. It's called Yuka, Yuka. You can literally scan every product and see what type of ingredients it has and whether or not those are safe ingredients for you to eat. Very simple. We're now making it simple for you to have the knowledge, to be empowered with that knowledge.
Yeah. And I mean, I had never heard of that app, and especially what my show does. So I'm going to be trying to reach out to them and
Yep,
see if I can
and
get
see if
them
you can get
involved.
a affiliate. Yes, that's
Yeah,
a good
because
idea.
I mean, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, a lot of people especially even in the political realm right now they're really paying attention just because even the ones that don't like RFK are now more hyper aware of what's going on because of him. And, no
And
matter
all
what,
he's doing is saying what the Europeans have been doing for decades. And they've been
yes,
saying, we're not going to take American meat. We're not going to take American, XYZ because of all the hormones and the pesticides and the list goes on. That's all he's saying. He's not a quack, of course, the food industry wants him to appear that way because they are going to lose, some of their profits.
Yeah, I mean, it's unfortunate.
Yes.
You know, they when you kind of think that with like healthcare and educate or health and education, I'm sorry, like
Hmm.
where they collide. Why does
Yes.
it seem like it's impossible to fix that divide, that gap?
Not impossible. It just requires courage. It requires someone that has a loud mouth. And that's not and seriously, it just requires you to be front and center and be courageous to buck the system. I look at Mississippi when it comes to education. They went from 50th up to the top 10. They call it the Mississippi miracle when it comes to education. And you know what they did? They simply went back to basics. They said, enough with this. Every 4 years, we're going to have a new curriculum, new textbooks that really only benefited the textbooks and curriculum companies, right? Not the
Right.
students, not the teachers, definitely uh, so here's what we need to do is just go back to basics, right? America food industry can go back to basics. You know that when we got that food pyramid, that was incorrect. Do you remember learning about the food pyramid?
Yeah. How
That that's
he turned it upside down.
yes, that's an incorrect food pyramid. We are not to do what that pyramid suggests. And they knew that it was incorrect or false information even back then when they first put it out. So we have been a generation, 2 generations have been trained on that false information. And so just educate yourselves. Is all I have to say. Everyone needs to educate themselves, and it's not difficult to make changes. We just all need to be on board that this is something that we are demanding. And guess what? Changes will happen.
It's that commitment aspect of it. That's the hardest part of everything. I had just read a book that a previous guest had wrote, and it was essentially battling the inner you. And
Mm,
essentially like he talked a lot about we all have that devil per se inside of us that
right.
we know that we shouldn't say something or we shouldn't do something, but it comes out and then you're like, all right, I shouldn't have done that.
Mm,
He's a preacher and he goes, oh, I preach, the gospel on Sunday. And he goes, and then I go home and my wife does something that bothers me and I'll snap sometimes. And he goes, and he just kind of talked about how, but he said what really like, and where this kind of plays into it is that commitment to try to not let that. And he said, you don't change yourself by changing your habits per se. He says you have to change what's in your heart and what
right.
you want to be dedicated to.
Out
He
of the
said,
abundance
that's
of
how
the
you,
heart.
yeah, yeah. He said, that's where you'll make that change in. And I'm not gonna lie, uh, that really changed my outlook on a lot of things,
Mhm.
because it was probably the first book I've ever read that really just made me like it was like somebody talking to me.
I love that.
Yeah, and that's it, especially like with like some of like what you talk about. It's you worked with medical interpreting, I believe.
Correct, yes.
And what happens though, like when the families don't fully understand what doctors are telling them? Because I've had that problem where my wife thankfully kind of works at like she more like works on like the staffing end of the hospital. But she at least has some, basic idea.
Yes.
So what does that mean for your end? Like, where does that come in?
So a lot of people think that if you speak English, passable English, conversational English, that it's going to be used in any setting, and that's not the case. So you can speak English that will get you an order at a restaurant, passable English to get you by on your day to day. But when it comes to difficult situations, such as, or high stress situations, such as what you experience in a hospital, in a doctor's office, or even in a legal setting, you're not going to have enough proficiency to navigate that. And that is where a medical interpreter or legal interpreter comes into place. And so my program simply train people who are bilingual to know what to do, the confidentiality aspect of it, the medical jargon aspect of it. Because even if you speak perfect English, it's still very difficult to understand medical jargon, right? So it taught you, where to stand, all of those very important skill sets of a medical interpreter. So that was my program. But definitely when it comes to healthcare, on the other side, for the providers, if they're not using an interpreter, oftentimes what they do is that they over diagnose. They prescribe all of these diagnostic tools, which guess what? runs up their costs, runs up the overall cost of healthcare, or they're risking liability. So I'll give you one simple example. The word once, right?
Yeah.
It's one time in English. In Spanish, that spells once, which is 11. So one little simple mistake can cause deaths. And so if you don't have interpreter, if you don't have a translator, that's the type of liability that a provider could be facing for not properly communicating, that it's take this pill once a day, not 11 times a day. So things like that.
Wow. I think that's a lot. Probably a lot of. I'm not gonna lie. Until I learned about this, I didn't really even know that that was something that per se existed. That's wow. But at what point did schools become like this emergency backup system for all of this?
For all of what specifically?
For where like where the collision is, right? Because I know they use a lot of what I hear is the school lunch menus. I had talked about Lunchables have lead in them. You know,
Gosh.
every
Yeah.
single Lunchable has lead. And what really kind of got me is the lawsuit that Kraft Foods was facing. The only reason the lawsuit got dropped is because they agreed to take it out of the national school lunch menu. They didn't take the lead out of it. They took it off the national school lunch menu. And they still didn't publish on the packaging or to parents what's in it.
And it's still being sold in.
Yes, yeah, nothing's changed. They said they were going to try, but Consumer Reports tested them almost a year later and it's still the same thing. Nothing's changed.
Gosh, that is horrible. That is absolutely atrocious, really. Again, they are prioritizing the bottom line over health, right?
Yes. If you could redesign, one of these like overlaps, right? Because it all overlaps, but it doesn't make sense for
Mhm.
the average person, between health and education. What would you redesign it?
Well, for one thing, I would try to inject our regulators, right? The government that we elect to protect us and represent us. I would try to inject them with a little bit of cojones, some balls, right? So
Right.
that they actually do the work that we're sending them to Washington or to the state capital to do. So we're not being protected by those that should have our best interests. And I can understand why. We have the food lobbying, the healthcare lobbying, the pharmaceutical lobbyists all spending millions of dollars in campaign funds, right?
Right. That's a lot of cash too.
It is. It is for our representatives to turn the blind eye to what is being done to the healthcare of our citizens. And yes, a lot of that is passed through to the education system. So if I could have a magic wand, that's what I would do is to say, let's have some courage. And I believe that the best way to do that is by term limits. I think if we enforce term limits, I'm a big proponent of the Convention of States. I don't know if you've heard of that, where they're
Yes.
going state by state to pass a resolution so that we can have a constitutional amendment to have term limits at every level of government, specifically at the top. And I think if we did that, we would have more people of courage that are leading
Yes.
our country, and therefore we won't see these atrocities in the name of profit, in the name of bottom line.
Yes. I'm a big proponent of getting rid of the 17th Amendment.
Okay.
And I say that because I feel as if the Senate was appointed and not popularly elected, there'd be a lot less donor money.
Okay.
And they would represent our issues at the state level a lot. That's how it was intended to be. But 100 years ago, it was a whole lot easier to scan the system than it is now. It's a lot more transparent.
Hmm.
If your senator, because I believe most states, not every single state, most states they were appointed, by either the legislature or the governor, and essentially they would be forced to recognize what the state governments are facing, and they're facing some of the problems we're talking about, mounting
Exactly.
healthcare costs, these things, and that would reduce the influence outside money could have at the federal level because they would have to actually answer to the state legislature, not just, well, I was elected, I don't really talk to you, because that's
Got
kind of
it.
how it feels like it is, you
It
know,
is very much so.
because the House seems to always have some kind of idea how to fix something, even if it's like an outlandish idea that would never work. But they can at least get something passed where the joke is, I don't know if you know, but everything dies in the Senate.
Correct.
That's bills go to die.
And I think that if we married that idea as far as abolishing that amendment with along with term limits, then we would definitely see some major changes.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bummer, but like, when we think of that, at what point did children's health become so partisan? That's the part that is really crazy to, I think, anybody with a child.
Everything is partisan now.
Oh, I know. Don't call the sky blue. Somebody might come after you.
Yes.
Is it the healthcare companies and that, who and not just maybe just in general from your perspective, who benefits the most when these problems don't get solved?
Definitely the lobbying companies, all these companies that are making money. But here's the thing. I don't know if you're aware of this. Back in the day when the news was a public service, because it's no longer a public service. It used to be a required that the news was a public service and they had to provide actual information to the public. Now, that requirement went away once broadcast, television or channels went away. And so that, and there was a huge lawsuit to make those requirements to no longer be requirements also. So now all of the news that we get is really just propaganda. It's
Yes,
all that it.
I had a
It's
friend who worked in advertising,
Mhm.
and he told me they're registered entertainment companies now.
Exactly. They are. And so there it's not news. And so I think it's really important that you realize that you're not consuming news. You're just consuming someone's ad, okay?
Yeah.
And the majority of that ad is meant to divide. It's fear-mongering, it's polarizing, and it's meant to divide opinions, right? And then when you add social media on top of that, where all it's doing is feeding you this constant loop of information that's just going to make you more and more radicalized in your opinions, right? Because it's not giving you any differing opinions, right? It's just going to feed you more and more of that. And it's going to be negative for the most part because it wants you to keep clicking, right? Negative news, negative reels are going to keep you much more engaged than nice information, unfortunately. And so if you put those two together, of course, we're going to end up in the state that we're in.
Yeah, for me, that makes sense. I mean, that kind of leads me to like, what incentives seem to like kind of give a reward, to the delay instead of us moving forward with everything.
Let's take a quick break.
The Middle Ground, Mike, isn't just another podcast. It's a movement for unity, for truth, for a future beyond the left and the right. But movements don't grow without people willing to stand up. Subscribe now on Buzzsprout. Fuel this mission directly on PayPal. Every subscription keeps the fire burning. The links are in the show notes. Be more than a listener, be part of the Middle Ground.
Well, the news medias are making more money, right?
Yeah.
All of their ads are the companies that are posting their ads on those channels are making more money. So that's the incentive.
Yeah. I mean, if politics steps aside, a lot would just change. If it was actually about results rather than political talking points. You know, tell everybody a little bit about your work, your writings, and kind of how all that plays together.
So I have several books on my website. I don't know if you're aware of this, Joe. I'm actually running for office myself. I'm running for superintendent of schools of the state of Georgia.
Yes, I
So
now remember that now that you mention it.
yes, yes. And so my website is drnelvalee.com, and I have my books there, social media links, and other interviews that I've done. But really and truly, I am just an advocate. I've always been an advocate. Whenever I see injustice, I just can't sit by, and do nothing. That's just not how I'm wired. I'm wired to want to do something to make a change, a positive change for others. And so that's really what I'm about and what I'm passionate about right now.
Yeah, and that's awesome. I mean, I can imagine running for public office is not an easy thing to do. There's always so many hurdles,
Yes, yes,
and I can imagine they try to make it very difficult for you to crack that space.
correct. Yeah, the current incumbent in the superintendent, he's going on his 12th year. And we have only seen declines under his tenure, but yet he's running again. So that tells you a little bit about, whether or not we are seeing the best that we can see. We need new leadership in Georgia. And so we need to have people that are engaged with the political sphere in what is happening, especially with our children. We need them engaged so that they can make some changes at the voting booth.
Yes, we definitely got to make sure kids are more educated, especially when it comes to politics and figuring out how to educate them to not buy into the partisan divide right
Correct.
off the bat. Because I am wholeheartedly convinced one side could invent the cure to all diseases and the other side would call it a conspiracy and you would have
Exactly.
half the country. It just would. Like nobody would even look into it. It would just be automatic and people would have their minds made up before the sentence even finished.
Yes, for sure.
And that's a pure shame.
Yes.
What myth to me, like, I guess myth or theory per se, does your work challenge the hardest?
Just this idea that the status quo has to stay that way. We are being told that this is how it's always been and this is how it always will be. And I would challenge that. And that is a myth. And I believe that everyone listening to this has the power to make changes, positive changes. And so you need to take ownership of that. And again, stop watching so much news, stop watching so much social media, and instead arm yourself with knowledge about policy, about things that are affecting you and your family in particular, and go down to the Capitol, pick up the phone or email your representative and let them know that you are putting them on point, that you are putting them up to the task of actually
Yes.
representing you.
And that is, oh my gosh, that is so critical. I try to tell people you can disagree with someone you voted for. That's okay. Just because you voted for them doesn't mean everything they do is biblical. And I think that's to me probably what drives the partisan thing among everything in America, not just politics. Because I kind of relate. I'm a Detroit Lions fan,
Okay.
and the Lions for once in my life are relevant. 3 years going, they're a relevant team. But I kind of attribute it to like sports, where your team is your team, and they're the best thing ever, no matter how bad they are, and everybody else is the bad guy. And I feel like that has permeated outside of sports, and that mentality has kind of impacted everything we do.
Gotcha.
And I think that's part of, where that hurts is people just, I voted for this guy or I like this. So it's just whatever they say is, it's gotta be right. It can't be wrong.
Yes.
You've wrote several books and I'm gonna have to read some of them. I love reading books. It's
Good.
a really good way to unplug your mind,
There you go.
and it gets your mind going. But what do readers tell you that you've talked to that has surprised them?
About my books
Yeah.
specifically, really my books, I call them my written testimonies. And so a lot of them are just how I've overcome a lot of the different challenges in my life. And I try to give others sort of like a pathway forward so that they don't have to make the same mistakes that I made or that they can take advantage of lessons learned and be able to circumvent those life challenges with that. And so I'll tell you one of the books I wrote, Be the Superhero of Your Story. It was written in the aftermath of COVID. And when we saw all of the anxiety and depression, we know statistically that suicide rates went up, alcohol and drug addiction went up during, in the aftermath of COVID. And so a lot of it is because we have lost the art of resilience. And so that book is really a book about this is what resilience looks like. And, everyone can achieve that. And basically, it's a book reminding people that challenges are really only there to show off our strengths. That's it. Just like superheroes need a big
Yes.
challenge to overcome so that they can see what their superpowers are. Same with us. Whenever we face a major challenge, it's just a paradigm shift. Okay, what is this supposed to show off as far as my superpowers?
I was one of those people who went through that after COVID. I used to be before COVID, I would be the guy that going to a football game, I would be there at 6 o'clock in the morning for a 1 or 2 o'clock game. I always wanted to be out in the thick of things. And then COVID made me really go, I don't want to be around people anymore. And my wife used to be the one that was a homebody.
Okay.
And then I became the homebody, and she's like, "I haven't really changed. You wanna stay home now." And that's something that I've actively tried to really get out of that habit, and I find that I'm happier getting out of that habit, but I don't think a lot of people even realize that that happened to them.
Got it. Got it. Yeah, a lot of social isolation. Yes, for sure. And that affected, people's ability to cope because we're not meant to be isolated.
No, humans are social animals, just
Yes,
like
exactly.
dogs.
Yes,
Like, we have to have a group.
that's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bummer with what COVID did, to be honest. I don't know what the right way or wrong way to been handling it was. 'Cause, to be fair, I don't think a lot of people really knew. I think they were just taking shots in the dark and hoping something would stick.
Well, we did know. We did know. I mean, the problem was that we acted like we didn't know. I remember. I mean, and any one of those of us who have been in the healthcare system for any length of time, we knew how to handle, an outbreak. We've handled outbreaks in hospitals, nursing homes. We've handled many, the CDC certainly knew how to handle outbreaks, but we definitely acted like we had no idea what was happening. And that slowness to act and the slowness to really take leadership in that space is what caused so much of the issues. I can tell you, I refuse to wear masks for the most part because those little paper masks did absolutely nothing. Unless you had the super duper, mask that kept out all the pathogens, all you were doing was just suffocating yourself, really. And so there was so much lack of really good information at the time that just led to so much fear. And you can see from the statistics, so many people died from comorbidities, not even from COVID itself, because there was so much fear. And so it's unfortunate.
No, yeah, I mean, looking forward, what gives you hope going into the future?
I think what gives me hope is knowing that myself and others, are no longer just taking things like yourself, Joe. We're no longer taking things sitting down. The fact that everyone can now tune into podcasts and hear truth with unfiltered truth, right? Those are things that give me hope, that I believe that we're moving into an era where we're no longer force fed lies, and we have at our fingertips the ability to really research for ourselves. I joked about ChatGPT, but ChatGPT is my favorite assistant because
It helps.
it does. You put a question in there or, a concern, and it'll give you research, information on that.
Yes.
So that does give me hope that we're now entering in an era where we're no longer going to be able to say, well, I just didn't know, because there's going to be so much information and so many avenues such as this podcast to get correct information.
Yeah, and information's hard to accurate information is hard to come by, or passionate information. From your end, what can listeners do this week for them that can really help them get on that journey, that path?
Download Yuka, right? That,
Yes,
that, that
I
would be
mean,
number one.
most definitely.
And, you can just do like a 10-day, 14-day fast from processed foods. I would highly recommend doing that. Don't drink your calories. No, that's a really easy way of getting rid of processed foods, because just about anything that we drink is a processed. That is not water, is processed. And so, just little baby steps like that can make a big difference. And like I said, when you are breaking your fast, it doesn't matter what time that is, but make sure that you're breaking it with something that's going to help your metabolism, not hurt it. One of the things that I do every morning is I take the apple cider vinegar and make sure it has the mother in it, right? Not the distilled one, but the one with all the brag in it, and just 2 capsules of that. I take those, and that is amazingly, it helps with your sugar spikes. It helps with metabolism. That one little thing, not even changing the way that I eat per se, but that one little step early in the morning makes so much of a difference with your metabolism for the rest of the day. Just make little changes like that in your diet, and you'll see amazing differences.
And now I'm going to ask the question that all Americans are probably going to think at some point:
What's that?
Is coffee really the devil? Because I mean, I drink my 1 or 2 cups a day. It's kind
As
of like
long as
a
you're
habit.
drinking it black, it's not the devil. But once you start adding milk and sugar and creamer and you name it, yeah, it's no longer healthy for you.
I'll have to get out of the habit of milk because I always put just like a little dash in there, just take the
Yeah,
edge off.
gotcha.
But coffee is just that is something that is like, an American staple. It is as American
Yeah,
as apple pie these days.
gotcha.
You know, and how can people like demand better from all of this without becoming, because it's easy when you're frustrated and you're mad. And I'm sure you just experienced this with your son, without becoming cynical.
Go through your pantry. Don't become angry. Okay, because anger is not a good emotion. But really, just arm yourself with information and go through your pantry and look at all the things in there that are not healthy, not not healthy for you, not healthy for your children. Like honestly, if your children are eating cold cereal, it's probably not a good idea. That's not a good breakfast food. It's full of sugar. I don't even if it says low sugar, it's full of sugar. I heard
Why?
once that Raisin Bran back in the day, I remember when I used to be a kid, I loved Raisin Bran. It used to have just 3 ingredients in it. Now, if you look at the back of the box, it has like 14 to 20 ingredients. Right? Why does Raisin Bran need all those ingredients?
Shouldn't.
So go through your pantry, throw out anything that is unhealthy. If you need some help in figuring out what's healthy or not, go to Yuka or just chat GPT it. Say, hey, chat GPT, how many bad ingredients does this particular food have? And it'll tell you, just so be mindful, don't be cynical, just be armed with information and say, I'm going to be better for my family. And then once you make that step and you're consistent, then you can take it a step further and demand that your representatives do something about it.
No, that's always the critical part, is getting them to do something about it.
But if
You know,
if there's enough of an outcry, they will.
they don't have a choice. I mean,
Correct.
whenever the people unite and really make a big outrage, things do always change to some degree.
Correct.
And
Yes.
we do, like, as much as people may not feel like it, we do hold the power. You know,
Correct. We do.
even if people look at history, there's been kings, there's been dictators, and they have the power till everybody starts getting upset and then they get deposed. Even in
Exactly.
times where people were the subjects of the kings, if enough of them got mad, that king was gone.
Or his head was off.
Yes. They,
So here's the thing. Politicians are very afraid of voters uniting. Very
yes,
deeply afraid. Because at the end of the day, even if they spend most of their time with lobbyists, it's you, the voter, that's keeping them in that office. Okay? They're
yes.
definitely afraid. If, I was told by a politician, if we get 10 emails on one subject, it's a big deal. Just 10 emails. Believe it or not, that's all it takes. 10 different, of their constituents having on the same topic. It's an outcry. And so that tells you just how much apathy exists with our voters. Yes. So don't be
Wow.
don't be one of those. Don't be apathetic. Do something about it. Send an email, pick up the phone, make a phone call, and say, this is what I want to see happen. And I'm going to get my inner circle involved in making this happen.
That's just, wow. I didn't realize only 10 emails a day. That is, wow. That's very surprising. And I think a lot of people listening to this are probably looking at who's ever next to them going, did you ever really think of that? Because that's what just went through my head.
That's all it takes. Exactly. But when was the last time that you emailed your representative?
Oh gosh. Yeah, you're not wrong.
Exactly.
Not very
Exactly.
often. Yeah, just
Exactly.
because everybody feels like, that you get that generic standard auto response and they think that's
You
where it
might,
ends.
you might, but if 10 more people said the same information, guess what? They're going to start scurry.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's like you said, that's what they're afraid of. As we wind down, is there anything that you give people a little bit more? Everybody, all her links and stuff will be in the description. But
Yes.
push your stuff out there again, because this is stuff that people really need to check out because it is so important. And I'm learning day by day how important things like this are.
go to drnelvalee.com. That's drnelvalee.com. I actually have 2 bills on that website that I'm trying to pass, and you can sign my pledge actually on that website for that. But definitely check out my books, other speeches and podcast interviews that I've done, and my social media handles are there as well.
Awesome. Well, Dr. Nelva Lee, I really appreciate you coming on here today. It's definitely been informative, and especially some of those things like, that 10 email thing really stuck out to me. And then the app, I
Yes.
honestly had no idea that ever existed. And I've been looking at stuff like that. So I'm like, what? How did I hate
Yes.
when I miss things that seem to be right in front of your face.
Yes.
It always seems to happen. So, but everybody, if you like this kind of conversation, subscribe, share, follow Dr. Nelva Lee, comment, let us know what you think. I really appreciate your time. I appreciate the listeners' time, and I definitely appreciate your time, doctor, because
Thank you
everybody's
for
time is
having
very precious. All right, everybody, thank you for tuning in, and I hope everybody has a good night.
Thank you.